All right. Good day, everyone, and welcome to the Ballast Exercise Podcast. I am your host, Sam Trotta, and this podcast is dedicated to helping everyone listening feel, function, look, and live better through exercise. That is my mandate as an exercise professional, whether it's through this podcast, the Ballast Exercise online exercise platform that I have, or my gym, Striation 6 in Toronto, or anything else I might do in the future when it comes to exercise. And I am honored and privileged to welcome Avril Mansfield to the podcast today. So Avril is the head of Symbol, which is the Safe Independent Mobility Lab. It's a very, very cool organization. Avril is a scientist at the Toronto Rehabilitation Institute out of the UHN, or the University Health Network in Toronto. She's an affiliate scientist in evaluative clinical sciences, Hurwitz Brain Sciences Program, Sunnybrook Research Institute, and an associate professor, status only, in the Department of Physical Therapy at the University of Toronto. Avril has been a member of my gym on and off for, it's got to be about 7 years now. And she comes across to me as a sort of quiet, unassuming person. And I found out she's this, super cool biomechanics researcher doing really cool research into reactive balance training and she'll be able to tell us more about it, the general promotion of exercise, particularly among stroke patients, but from my understanding, through the general population as well. So enough from me. Avril, great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's great to be here.
All right. So I swear Avril okayed this before we started chatting here, but my idea is to begin these interviews with a bit more of a personal note. So, Avril, what can you tell us and anybody listening about squatting in knee sleeves? What's happening there?
I don't know. So this is something I've started to do recently. I have been squatting on and off my whole life, or my whole adult life. And recently got back to doing it because I have a knee injury that's very, very old, and I went to physiotherapist. Physiotherapist had added squats as an exercise that I should be doing. She probably wasn't thinking that I should be lifting as heavy as I am, but there we go. I just started seeing other people using these sleeves and thought that it was something that I should do to kind of protect my knees a little bit as I'm lifting these heavy weights. So it's something I've been doing for maybe a month now, and it feels nice and comfy and snug because they are very tight. I don't know how much they really help, but I like it. They're very hard to put on.
A little tight there, little tight squeeze getting into them.
And particularly, I have huge calves, so it's real. Like once I get them over the calf, it's fine, but getting them over my calves is a bit of a challenge. So it's a bit of an arm workout too to get them on.
Well, I can tell you with that huge calves admission or point that you just made there, it shouldn't be an admission; it should be a point of pride. You made at least 50, I'd say as much as 80% of the men listening to this podcast extremely jealous. So congratulations on those.
No one ever works on their calves. They got to work on their calves, right?
it's like Milhouse said on The Simpsons, they're the hardest place to add mass. All right, so let's move into something maybe a little more substantial. So you are the head of this amazing lab called Symbol that seemingly is doing all this very, very cool research. And the first part of it that caught my eye, and I appreciate you turning me on to PROPEL as well, but the first part that caught my eye was this idea of reactive balance training. So can you tell us a bit about reactive balance training? What is that?
Yeah, so this is something I've been doing for my whole academic career. So to kind of talk about what balance reactions are, reactive balance. So balance has two different components. Sorry if you can hear my cat yelling at me.
Pets are welcome. Pets are absolutely welcome here.
So balance, it's two different components. One is anticipatory balance control, and one is reactive balance control. So anticipatory balance control is the balance that you need to just move around in your daily lives. Even as I'm sitting here, I need to keep my balance as I'm sitting, otherwise I'll flop over. And even raising your arm to one side is shifting the location of your center of mass, and you need to adjust to compensate for that so that you don't fall. So that's anticipatory balance control, balance in anticipation of destabilization that's going to be caused by movement. but then when the destabilization happens, reactive balance control is how you respond or react to that instability to stop yourself from falling. So it could mean that you're taking a step, you're reaching out to grab for something. If you're standing on the subway's moving suddenly, you know, sometimes that happens all the time. It enters the station and suddenly they slam on the brakes or they get going really quickly. And if you're already holding onto the handrail, then making little adjustments at the handrail can help to keep your balance. So most balance training is focusing on the anticipatory part. So it's people trying to maintain stability while they're doing various movements. And reactive balance training, we want people to experience instability and have to execute these balance reactions. And by practicing them over and over again, they improve their control of balance reactions. And when they lose their balance out in the real world, they hopefully are going to be better able to stop themselves from falling. So that's what it is in a nutshell. There's different ways that we can do it. We can use programmable treadmills that move really quickly. Your typical treadmill in a gym is designed to not cause people to lose their balance. It ramps up very slowly and down very slowly. So there are special treadmills where the belt is designed to move much more quickly to cause people to lose balance. But we also prefer to do a bit of a no-tech approach where the therapist will literally push or pull somebody to cause them to lose their balance, and then they need to react, and they get to practice it that way. That's it. Yeah.
Wow.
Anything to consider?
No, that sounds pretty cool, and it sounds like I mean, just intuitively with my own background, it sounds like the findings from that might be very useful for a huge and growing part of the population, that being people who are elderly. And I believe, now correct me if I'm wrong, did a lot of your research focus on people who were rehabilitating from strokes, or am I mistaken with that?
Yeah, no, that's true. We've done some work with just older adults, people who are relatively healthy and don't really have any medical conditions, as well as people who have multiple diagnoses. And a lot of my work right now is focused on people with stroke. We've done other research with a collaborator of mine working with spinal cord injury as well, people with incomplete spinal cord injuries. And there's lots of research. I'm not the only person doing this kind of research. There's other people around the world that are working with people with Parkinson's disease or amputees. So it's something that could be done by anyone who has a balance problem, right? Not just limited to one specific population.
Awesome. And this might be a little early to ask this question. So if it is, we can maybe get into some other areas of your research and of your work. But have you found any sort of corroborative information between the different populations that stands to kind of promote the idea of reactive balance training as a generally useful tool for people?
So are the findings similar across different populations, basically?
Yeah. Have you found any sort of corroborative pieces of evidence?
I think so. It is a bit early to tell because the problem is that, so like myself, I tend to work with people with stroke. Another researcher in the Netherlands might be working with people mostly with Parkinson's disease. So there's that difference between us, but then we're also doing other things differently. So we have different training approaches. They might be using the treadmill. We're using the pushes and pulls from the therapist. They might do higher volume of training. We do a low volume of training. So there's a lot of differences between how different people are applying this and researching it around the world. So if any differences that we see between findings of studies could be due to the population, but it also could be due to the different training approaches that people are using. And we just don't know enough yet from all the research that's been done, whether there are different findings for different populations. But it seems like it's at least somewhat similar. There's something that's trainable with everybody. What's really interesting with people with stroke is you're probably aware that a lot of people with stroke have a more affected side. So one side of the body is usually a lot weaker than the other side. And often they'll have difficulty using that leg or arm on that side of the body. But we're still able to engage the more reflexive part of the balance reaction to get that limb to engage a little bit more, which is really kind of cool and interesting.
Yeah.
But whether that translates into improved voluntary movement, we don't really know yet too, right?
That's so cool. That's cool. And I always appreciate hearing about the scientific approach. Like that's my favorite answer. We're not sure yet.
Yeah.
There's so many different variables versus like, yes, I found it's 100% this or that. I think that makes for trustworthy information.
Yeah. Any scientist who tells you anything for sure is probably bullshitting you.
You heard it here, folks. Any
Yeah.
scientist who tells you anything for sure is probably bullshitting you. Okay. I'll take that from a scientist any day of the week. So, just in terms of a bit of your professional background, I suppose, what inspired you to get into this area of research?
That could be a very long answer. I'll try to condense it.
We
So
got
I,
time.
yeah, sure. I started my undergrad in exercise science, sport and exercise science, and I just thought it was cool. Particularly the elite sport area, how to maximize human performance. It's very, very cool application of science. But when I was doing the program, I got a bit disillusioned with the elite sport part. And, it helps such a small percentage of the population. There's so few elite athletes in the world. So the exercise part and trying to promote and apply exercise to people who experience more challenges with exercise, people with disabilities, older people, is so much more beneficial and can do more good than the elite sport. Now, the elite sport stuff is still really cool, not to kind of crap on that area of science either. But but personally, I felt that I would prefer to work with people who I felt needed it a lot more. So I started looking more into other labs around the world that were looking in, like, doing research in rehabilitation and exercise applied to rehab, or biomechanics applied to rehab, and found this person in Toronto, Brian Mackey, who I worked with as an undergraduate student, and then eventually did my PhD with him. And he was doing a lot of the research in reactive balance control. And then when I was thinking about doing a PhD, he had a project that was a training study. So it fit really well with me. It seemed like the stars aligning or whatever. And so it wasn't really a deliberate thing. It was just kind of like you make one decision and it takes you down this path, and then you keep kind of going down that path and see where it goes.
Awesome. Yeah, I can definitely what's the word, empathize with the idea of affecting a certain kind of population. I think most people who get into the exercise profession as personal trainers or coaches, they start out wanting to work with elite athletes,
Mm-hmm.
or people or creating elite physiques, or what they think
Right.
is an elite physique for someone. And then a lot of us, myself, I mean, at least in my experience, you start going through your career and you realize, okay, so there are all these other people that I could help. And you think about the idea of performance. I'll never forget the time I was at a class in Oklahoma City, and I saw a client of the instructor, who had his T5 and T6 vertebrae shattered. So for anyone who doesn't recognize the anatomy, that's kind of like the mid levels of your spine, two of the mid levels of your spine, and shards, not shattered, but he'd been in a motorcycle accident, and
Right.
shards from the bone had frayed his spinal cord. He got some stem cell treatment overseas, and saw a couple of we'll just say rehabilitation specialists, and then was working with my instructor. And I saw him wiggle one of his toes for the first time since the accident had happened, and it looked like he was doing kind of a 1 rep max of a squat. And when
Right.
you think about the idea of performance and elite performance versus normal performance, I mean, there's nothing normal about what I saw there, and everything about what I saw was elite. So it starts to open your eyes to these different possibilities. So very cool. I can definitely identify with that.
Absolutely.
So do you have I guess sort of on that note, do you have any particularly outstanding stories that you can share about research participants who saw big leaps, or what would, in the context of the research and of the kind of training you were doing, big leaps?
We do. It is great to see people when they come back after they've been doing the training, and they're so much better with the tests that we're doing. So even subjectively, we can tell that they're better, and they have improved. The one story that I don't know if I believe, but I'll share it anyway. One of our participants, so we're training people to make these reaching movements and stepping movements really quickly, but as a reaction to them losing balance. And she was telling me that she had been with her friend somewhere, and her friend was about to start walking down the stairs, and almost fell down the stairs. Her friend started to lose her balance, and started to fall down the stairs. And so this participant was able to reach out really quickly and grab her friend and stop her from falling. And so she thought, she was chalking it up to the training that we had done with her. Again, I'm skeptical, but it's a nice little anecdote that maybe there's benefits for other people besides the people who do the training too.
That's pretty cool. That's
Yeah.
a pretty cool story, and it speaks to the idea of the client, the patient, the participant experience,
Mhm.
and the whole idea of, I guess it sounds like that person maybe doubted whether or not they'd have had the ability to do that without the training in the lab.
Yeah, and there is some evidence that the training does improve voluntary reaction time. So even reacting to non-balance loss stimulus
Okay.
does seem to improve with reactive balance training. So it is possible that it helped, but yeah, it's just an anecdote. It's just kind of
It
fun.
just obviously in an unofficial way on that last point where the training could transfer to a voluntary reaction.
Mm.
Um, would you have any sort of working hypothesis about or thinking about how that might transfer, how the one type of training might transfer to the other from the reactive to the voluntary?
Uh, I've never really thought about it because I guess we don't really in my world don't really care so much about voluntary
Okay.
reaction time, but people who like, to go back to elite sport, athletes really care about voluntary reaction time, so um, maybe they would be interested more in that, right? Yeah, it's a cool and interesting question that maybe in my world doesn't really matter so much, but
Yeah,
would
fair
matter
enough.
to somebody else. Yeah.
It's always it's just always so interesting to me when one type of training seems to transfer in its outcome to another type of effort. So, we put people in this very specific type of training that requires a very specific type of effort to a very specific type of demand. And then, at least in their interpretation, they get better at other stuff too. And the way that the one kind of training might influence the system to um yeah, just adapt to
Mhm.
different kinds of scenarios. It's very cool. It's just anyway, I'm geeking out here. That's a if you don't mind me asking, and by the way, any of these questions that I'm asking, you can totally feel free to be like, skip, it's all good.
Yeah.
But what are some of the difficulties you found in doing research in this area into this reactive balance training?
I don't think that we have any difficulty specifically with reactive balance training, but there are challenges with doing rehabilitation research. So, with say a medical trial, drug trial, surgical intervention, you give the person the medication and send them away, or you do the procedure on them and send them home. But with rehab studies, we are relying on people coming in to the lab 3 times a week for weeks or months, right? Because it's exercise. And that's challenging to do, right? People don't have the time to commit to that. They start to have issues with transportation. People get sick, and so they miss sessions, or they get busy. They have other appointments. So that's really, really challenging with all like similar kinds of rehab studies. So for anybody out there who's ever invited to be in a study, if you do have the time to participate, it's so appreciated, because it's so challenging to find people who are willing and able to participate. And then it gets
Awesome.
expensive too, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I guess incentives for participation can get expensive.
Incentives for participation, travel expenses for people.
For sure.
with the repeated visits, the time for the therapists and the research staff to see the people, if someone is taking a medication every day, you don't have to pay someone to give them the medication every day, right? But we have to pay someone to give them the exercise every time they come in. So those are the biggest challenges. And then whether people who do different kinds of research understand those challenges when they're evaluating the impact of our research is another kind of challenge, but that's a bit what the term is inside baseball, right? It's something that other scientists care about, that maybe the general public doesn't.
It's funny though, because as I'm sitting here thinking about it, they probably should,
Right.
right? The general, because if there's a sort of misinterpretation or a research finding of yours is taken out of context by another lab, and then that lab produces a certain finding, and that finding gets press, and it sort of
Yeah.
loses in translation. It's like, well, what do they say? Broken telephone once it gets to the
Yeah,
public.
and we're talking about like, so if someone is evaluating our research, like another scientist, like say at a
Oh, I see.
funding agency, and they're saying we're not very productive because we haven't done too many studies or something like that, but it's because we have these challenges. It takes so much longer to do the study because we need um, to get people in and have all those challenges with the multiple visits. So whether other scientists understand that when they're evaluating the research, not necessarily the research findings, but the research, how we're doing the research and the productivity part, right?
Awesome. Okay. Apologies for the
No, it's
misunderstanding
fine.
there. And are there any sort of take home points that people who are listening to this, who are interested in improving their balance and specifically their reactive balance, which I mean,
Mhm.
to me just sort of means preventing falling.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, and by the way, none of this would count as medical advice. Anybody
Yes.
listening to this, do not take this as medical advice. This is anecdotal learning from the lead scientist in this lab, who might say, if you were at home and you wanted to improve in this particular skill set, what are some of the things that you could do? And if the answer is not much yet, that's totally fine. But if there are some take home points that people could leverage to start getting better at this
Mhm.
reactive balance stuff, what might they be?
Well, I don't know too if your audience is if you have personal trainers in your audience too, a take home for everybody is everyone kind of forgets about balance as a component of fitness. People tend to work on cardio and they work on strength. Maybe they also work on flexibility, but they kind of forget that balance is something to work on too. So just kind of to think about how you can incorporate more balance tasks into your regular exercise routine. Um, Even doing something like a lunge is maybe because you're on one leg and you have this dynamic movement, like lunge versus a squat is more balance challenging, right? So just thinking about different ways that you can incorporate balance. I don't mean standing on Bosu balls necessarily.
I
That's
appreciate
not,
that.
yeah, not always the best way to do it. But whatever it is that you're doing in your exercise routine, can you do it in a way that you also add a little bit of a balance challenge? For the reactive balance part, I don't think there's much that people can do on their own. You will, by challenging your balance, you will put yourself in the position where you will start to fall sometimes and need to execute those balance reactions and train them. But you don't really want to deliberately do that when you're exercising on your own because you could actually fall, and that would be bad. For the moment, we do recommend that if someone is specifically concerned about their reactive balance control, that they should see a physiotherapist or a kinesiologist and have them treat the issue and have them deliver reactive balance training to them. So for now, it's not really something that could be done by a non-health professional, and not something that people can do at home or in the gym on their own.
Okay, and one more question about RBT, and this is from I swear I didn't leave this off our original list on purpose, but I'm wondering from my own um, conceptualization of exercise out of curiosity. Um, have there been any studies done in your lab or in another lab studying reactive balance that saw any correlation between improvement in muscle output where the training had nothing to do with balancing itself, and improvements in reactive balance training. So people doing things like knee extensions
Mhm.
and plantar flexion or calf raises and things like that. Is there any information there or any
So
findings there?
whether something like resistance training would translate to reactive balance control, improved reactive balance control.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I think no. And the reason is there is a baseline level of strength that you need for these balance reactions, but it's not a whole lot. So most people are already at that level.
Okay.
If you're below the level, then yes, it will help. But if you're already at that level, then doing more than that isn't gonna help balance reactions. But we're interested in the opposite too. So we have a study right now where we're looking at whether the reactive balance training translates to improvements in strength, because the way that you're executing, say, a stepping reaction and loading the limb, and there's a bit of an eccentric contraction to absorb the fall or the almost fall. Does that translate into improved strength? So we're still doing that study, and like as I said before, as I was complaining about before, it takes a really long time to do those studies, so we don't have any results yet, but really interested to see that. That was kind of motivated because some of our participants were reporting DOMs after they did reactive balance training, so suggesting that there is some stimulus to the muscle that could be improving their strength.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, keep me posted on that if you don't mind. I'd love to hear the results of that. And just for anyone who's listening who doesn't recognize the acronym DOMS, DOMS, it stands for delayed onset muscle soreness, and it just refers to the soreness you might feel in your muscle system after an intense bout of exercise or a not so intense bout of completely new exercise that has
Right.
your body going, "What are you doing to me?"
Mhm.
So are you okay to pivot to Propel?
Sure.
All right. So there's another project going on at the Symbol Lab. By the way, your acronyms are bangers. They're just so
I
good,
was so proud when we came up with
as
Propel.
you should be. So Propel out of the Symbol Lab, the Safe Independent Mobility Lab Symbol, amazing. Propel stands for Promoting Optimal Physical Exercise for Life, which is yeah, amazing acronym. But beyond amazing acronym, it seems like there's some pretty cool findings coming out of there as well. So what can you tell us about the Propel project?
Yeah, so Propel is something I guess when we were first talking about me being on this podcast, is talking about how promoting exercise for everybody is probably the biggest impact that I could have or anybody could have, because exercise is so important for preventing illness, for helping treat a lot of medical conditions and alleviating symptoms. But people don't do it, right? No one no one exercises as much as they should be.
We do.
So well, you I do and you do, but I don't always all the time too, right? Like
Fair enough. Yeah, fair
sometimes I'm
enough.
bad. um yeah, so I'm really interested in trying to get everyone to exercise more often, and to alleviate the barriers for exercising for everybody. But for the time being, we're starting with a specific group of people. So we did a exercise is good for everybody. Exercise is good for people with stroke and even early after stroke.
Yeah.
Specifically, aerobic exercise releases all of these good chemicals that help with brain repair. So it can actually help someone recover after they've had a stroke, and then improves their cardiorespiratory health so that they're less likely to have another stroke or another cardiovascular event like a heart attack in the future. So we did a study where we implemented an exercise program in the rehab program at Toronto Rehab, in the inpatient rehabilitation program. And we did some research around how that was implemented. Was it feasible to do? Who participated? Who didn't? We interviewed the patients who participated, and asked about their intentions to continue to exercise after they were discharged home. And the problem with rehab is that it's really short. So if someone is only in inpatient rehab for 4 weeks, how much are you really going to improve your cardiorespiratory fitness in 4 weeks? And they're not even exercise. They don't start the exercise program until they're 2 weeks in, because there's delays in getting them started. So we're really relying on people continuing to exercise after they're discharged home, so they can continue to get the benefits of the exercise program. So when we interviewed them about how they felt about this exercise program, they're all like, yeah, it's really great. I felt great doing it. I loved it. and I'm going to keep doing it when I get home. And even when we asked about their intentions and their specific plans, a lot of them had specific plans. They had a gym in their condo building that they were going to use. They were going to go to the local community center. They were going to go walking around their neighborhood, whatever it was. They knew what they could do. But then when we followed up with them, they weren't doing it, right? So you think about the challenges that your clients have, that you have, that I have with exercising. You don't have the time. Cost is a huge issue for people, access to resources. You add on top of that you have a physical disability, maybe you have a communication disability, and it's going to be so much harder for someone who's had a stroke to continue to exercise, right? So PROPEL, the idea is to combine an exercise program with their with the kind of an educational component and a behavior change, motivational interviewing component, where we're helping them to figure out how they're going to continue to exercise, talking about what did you like to do before? What kinds of exercise do you like to do? What resources do you have access to in your neighborhood or in your home? What can you physically do, and problem solving around that while they're still in rehab, so that when they go home and when they're on their own, they have the skills and knowledge and confidence to be able to continue to exercise long term. So that's the basic idea of the study. So we finished the study, and we're still writing it up right now, where we had this was happening in a bunch of hospitals across Ontario. And some of the hospitals were doing just an exercise program, and some of the hospitals were doing the exercise with the PROPEL part, with the education and behavior change component to it. And then we're seeing whether people do continue to exercise after they're discharged home. So we're still kind of working on analyzing the data, so I don't have anything that I can share with you right now. But when we did a pilot study on it, the results were really, really promising. So people were exercising more frequently at home for up to 6 months after they were discharged, which is really cool. Yeah.
That's awesome. And this next question might seem the answer to it might seem either intuitive or perhaps even irrelevant. I'm going to ask anyway. Did you find any significant differences in your study between people who had exercised regularly before their stroke versus people who had not?
So I'm a bad person. I didn't look at your questions in detail until just before we started talking. And I looked at that question like, that is a really, really good question. We haven't looked into that ourselves. And I don't recall ever seeing anyone else look into it. We do ask people about their historical exercise behaviors, and whether, how accurate that is, how good their recall is questionable. But we do have some information about that. But it's not something that I've really seen, but really, really interesting question that maybe I'll steal that as a research question that we'll look into in the future.
Please do. It's something I'd certainly be curious about, because I would just intuitively, and I could be wrong, and I'd be happy to be wrong. But intuitively, I would imagine that both from a physiological proficiency standpoint and from a habit formation standpoint, there might be an advantage in the efficacy of the program to someone who already had an instantiated exercise habit routine, the health that resulted from it beforehand. But I'd be curious to know.
You would think. I'm also really interested, just from seeing, not from my research, but from some people that I know in real life, because my research isn't real life. But in my outside life, from my research, that it seems the opposite can also be true. So someone can be very sedentary and have really poor health behaviors, and then have a health event, and then it's kind of the wake-up call for them to change their behavior and to improve going forward. So I could see both situations, right? That someone is really motivated to do better in the future because of this event that happened.
I suppose you could also see there might even be a third situation where someone who was, even if it's just self-regarded as elite in their athleticism before a health event like this, that leaves them with, partial physical paralysis, or so that they say, well, if I can't run my, 5 miles 3 times a week with, 8-minute
Right.
splits between the miles, I'm not doing it.
Right.
And it's kind of that sort of all or nothing hardcore attitude just sort of goes out the window once there's a big health event.
Yeah, I could see that too, like a type A kind of person who's, if I can't
Yeah.
do it perfect, then what's the point in doing it at all? Yeah.
The psychology around all that stuff, and I'm no psychologist, but the psychology around all that stuff is so interesting to me, and I was just so that was kind of the basis for my question.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would be pretty cool if some information came out about that. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Interesting.
And at this point, I'd want to ask the question: what significance do you see with this research to the general population? And again, it may be intuitive, but I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, as I said, sorry, I'm interested in this as a application to the wider population. I I'm a bit overwhelmed with where I would go to in my own research to kind of access more people and get some kind of intervention out to more and more people. I think the next population might be like people with obesity as a group that are at risk of medical events, to try to implement some kind of behavior change intervention that's not just focused on diet, but also on exercise and trying to live a healthier lifestyle. Um, but yeah, so I think the take home for someone who might be listening to this, who I don't know if someone is listening to this who's really sedentary. I don't know that that's your audience.
Fair enough.
But that if you are kind of struggling with like those barriers, like how do you find the time to do this? How do you, maybe someone who was exercising before and their life has changed, they've got a new job or kids or something, and so they're finding it hard to get back to exercise, that working with a professional like a kinesiologist, a good personal trainer, not just any personal trainer, could really help to that person could kind of give you a bit more ideas and help problem solve around how you could get back into an exercise program. Maybe you don't get back to doing exactly the exercise you were doing before, but you can figure something out that fits in with your new lifestyle with the help of another person if you're struggling to figure it out on your own.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for that. And are you okay to talk about you a little bit
Sure.
for the questions? That's cool. And
Sure.
again, I think this is important because there's research on exercise, there's information on exercise, and there's experience with exercise and exercise adjacent things that I think experience related is so valuable to people who might be listening to podcasts like this one. So I originally met Avril. I think had to be 2016 or 17.
Or 15? I don't
15, maybe
know.
even earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Avril joined my gym, Striation 6, here in Toronto, Canada, and was a pretty consistent participant. I used to teach a spin class, a group cycle class, where we combined isometric exercise with interval training, let's say higher intensity interval training, and had entertaining discussions about things like gender-free leprechauns and things like that. I don't know if you
I
remember
forgot
that
about
one.
the
That was
leprechauns.
yeah, that was quite the entertaining discussion. And so I always knew Avril as a person who was fit, who exercised consistently, but you've made some pretty significant changes to your system in the last little while. Would you be willing to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I was also just thinking that I think your spin class was the last thing I did before the world ended.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
before BC,
Yeah.
before COVID. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I don't know how much I want to go into detail about this. I've always been a bigger person. Had a bigger body. As I said, I have giant calves, but also, had belly and all of the other big parts that we really don't want to have. But also always exercised as well, right? So I guess I was just eating a lot too, and not really making up for the exercise wasn't making up for how much I was eating. And I've at various points in my life managed to lose weight, lose a bit of weight, gain a bit of weight back again. And with COVID, I lost a lot of weight very quickly.
Oh,
That was
okay.
not healthy.
But I didn't realize that. Right.
Yeah. So it was because of anxiety and all that, right? And so I at that point I had been at the same weight for a long time and didn't think that it was possible to go below it. I thought that was my set point. And with this sudden unexpected weight loss with COVID and unwelcome weight loss with the pandemic, I kind of realized I could go below that. And I actually managed to keep that weight off for 2 years. And then when I got COVID, I was sedentary and it came back again. So I was like, I don't want this extra 15 pounds anymore. I'm going to lose it again. I know that I can lose it. And just kind of kept going. And I think I'm a normal body weight for the first time in my adult life. And I'm pretty happy about it.
That's great. That's fantastic. And what the experience of that, how does it compare to how things were before? Because again, by all measures, you seemed like a fit, healthy person.
Yeah.
There was nothing about the way I saw. I mean, I saw you participate in classes. You were one of the people who I would have said was, one of the fitter ones in class, at least by the appearance of how hard you consistently worked on that bike. And I saw you in the gym doing other things and practicing Ashtanga yoga with your posts online. So there's just this other factor that seems to have been, call it body weight, that seems to have shifted now. And how is the experience of that versus the way it was before?
So yeah, I with being fit and healthy and exercising and stuff before, there's this movement of health at every size or any size, that I'm sure you've heard of. And I think it means a lot of different things, but to me it means, just because you're a bigger person doesn't mean that you can't also engage in healthy behaviors, without necessarily the goal to lose weight, right? If that happens as a side effect, then that's great. So yeah, that was always my sort of attitude, that I don't smoke. I eat relatively balanced meals. I exercise. I, do all the things that we should do to maintain health. And I just happen to be a bit bigger than maybe I should have been, or maybe my doctors wanted me to be. But I was still pretty healthy. So I think the only thing that's a bit different for me now is I have to buy a whole new wardrobe. So it's very expensive.
Well, that's fun, potentially, right?
And that I can do some stuff that I wasn't able to do before.
Okay.
And that's mostly around yoga. So you mentioned that I also practice Ashtanga yoga. And that is a very challenging and intense style of yoga, where you have to do because it's the rule. Do things like inversions and arm balances and twists. And particularly the twists are very hard to do if you have a belly in the way. So that was one of the things that was really motivating for me, that as soon as I started to lose that belly, those twists and things became a lot easier to do. And I was able to do them on my own without having help from the teacher. That's been really a really good positive feedback loop to kind of be able to do those things. But other things in my life are not really that different. Sometimes people make awkward comments to me.
Hopefully I've avoided that.
Oh no. Sorry. Did we disconnect for a second? No.
No. I think we just had a little pause moment there. So no glitch in there, people. Just a bit of a pause there. No, thank you for sharing that. I loved what you said earlier, discussing the PROPEL program, like just adding health, adding muscle health, adding cardiorespiratory health, adding good nutrition, adding a healthy mindset about exercise, adding education about how to bring these things into your life. And it's interesting because the marketing around exercise has focused on weight for so long. At the end of the day, though, the way I see it, and I don't know if you feel the same way, feel free to disagree. It's really just about adding health. And it's kind of like saying weight loss is a result or means success in exercise is kind of like saying money means success in life, versus both might just be byproducts of a person who's already successful.
100%. Yeah.
All
I
right.
don't have anything else to say. I
No,
fully
fair
agree with
enough.
that. Yeah.
Fair enough. Is
Yeah.
there anything else you'd like to say about Propel, Symbol, or the RBT research that we haven't covered?
I think that's it. If anyone out there has had a stroke and is interested in participating in research, drop me a line. But other than that, I think that's it.
Okay, so for anyone who's interested, I will be linking links. I don't know how else to say it. I'll be redundant. I'll be putting
Sure.
links. I'll be putting links to Symbol and to the various parts of Avril and her team's research in the show notes. Avril, thank you so much for being here today. This was great. I had a lot of fun. Thank you so much for shedding some light on this stuff, and thanks for just being awesome. I appreciate you.
Sure. No problem. Thanks for the invite, Sam.